the message that was never opened. But still read What If I Told You that somewhere in ancient Anatolia, there exists a message from 4,000 years ago that was never opened, not once, not even for a moment, not even accidentally, not even partially, and yet it was still read. Now pause, because this is where logic starts to break. If something is never opened, how can it be read? And if it can be read, was it ever truly sealed, or is sealed just a limitation of how we used to understand matter? And if that is true, what else in history have we misunderstood? This is not a simple archaeological discovery. This is a challenge to how we define access, time, and truth. And it begins in a place that today feels completely silent. Dust, soil, ruins, Kültepe, central Anatolia, but 4,000 years ago, this was not silent at all. It was alive, a trading hub, a critical node in one of the earliest international commerce networks in human history. Merchants moved constantly through its streets. Goods moved, silver moved, wool moved, grain moved, but the most important thing moving through this city was not physical. It was information, prices, contracts, debts, agreements, trust, because without information, trade collapses instantly, and in a world without digital systems, without duplication, without instant communication, information had to be physically protected, so they built a system, not advanced in the modern sense, but extremely precise. Clay. Tablets, but not just clay tablets, clay envelopes. Now, think about this carefully. A message written on clay, then placed inside another layer of clay, and sealed completely, pressed, marked, hardened, and once it hardened, it became irreversible, a physical lock that cannot be undone without destruction, not symbolic, not abstract, physical reality. If you break it, you destroy it. If you open it, you erase it. There is no backup, no copy, no archive, only one original truth, frozen inside Earth itself. At first glance, this seems like perfect security, a system designed for authenticity, for trust, for verification. But then a strange question appears. Why design a communication system where reading destroys the object being read? Unless reading was never the only purpose, unless preservation itself was part of the system, unless the message was designed to outlive not just the sender, but also the reader. Now imagine time passing, slowly, relentlessly, years, become decades, decades become centuries, centuries become millennia. Kültepe disappears not violently, not suddenly, but quietly. Trade routes shift, people leave, buildings collapse, and then silence. The city is buried. Layer after layer of soil covers everything, and for thousands of years, nothing touches it. No reading, no movement, no awareness until archaeology arrives and the story begins again. Excavation begins, slowly, carefully, layer by layer. Fragments appear, pottery, walls, broken, inscriptions. And then something appears that immediately changes everything. A clay envelope, still, sealed, perfectly intact. No cracks, no distortion, no sign of interference, as if time itself avoided touching it, and inside it, a message that has not been seen for 4,000 years. At first, this feels like a standard discovery. Document it, preserve it, open it, translate it. Move forward, but then comes the problem, a problem that has no comfortable solution. If they open it, they destroy it, not partially, completely. The artifact ceases to exist in its original form, and suddenly, archaeology is no longer about discovery. It becomes a moral and scientific paradox, knowledge versus preservation, truth versus destruction, access versus loss. And for a moment, there is no answer, only silence. Because this is not a language problem, not a translation problem, not even a historical problem. This is a physical limitation. Problem. A problem of matter, a problem of time, problem of how reality stores information. And for ancient civilizations, there was no solution. But modern science changes the rules. Modern science introduces something that does not interact with objects, but interprets them. X-ray tomography, a method that does not Open does not touch, does not alter only, observes, layer by layer, depth by depth, as if time itself is being peeled away without breaking reality. The sealed envelope is placed into the scanner and everything stops, because this moment is unprecedented in its implications. No destruction, no interference, only observation. Then the scan begins slowly, layer by layer, and inside the solid clay, something begins to emerge. At first, nothing clear, just distortions, shadows, noise, but then structure appears, lines, curves, symbols, writing, a message, emerging from inside sealed matter, without opening anything, without breaking anything, still sealed, still intact, and yet completely readable. Now, stop again, because this is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. How can something remain sealed and still be read? How can something remain untouched and still be accessed? And if this is possible, then what else in reality is already accessible? But we simply do not yet have the method to perceive it. But the content of the message is not what most people expect. There is no prophecy, no hidden warning, no religious revelation, no lost myth. Instead, it is something extremely human, a business record, a trade. Transaction, dough, barley, silver, wool, copper. Simple goods, simple exchange, simple economy. But that simplicity is exactly what makes it significant, because it reveals something deeper about the people of Kültepe. They were not primitive record keepers. They were system designers. They understood something fundamental about existence. Information must survive collapse, because everything else will fail. Eventually, cities fall, empires collapse, languages disappear, but information, if preserved correctly, survives its creators. And that is exactly what these seals represent. Not just protection, not just security, but verification, proof that nothing inside has been altered, a physical guarantee of truth across time. But then another question appears: why are there so many? Because archaeologists did not find one envelope. They found hundreds across multiple excavation, layers across different contexts, across different variations, some with multiple impressions, some corrected, some reused. Odds if the system itself was evolving over generations, as if communication was not static, but continuously refined. And that leads to a deeper question. Why would a civilization invest so much effort into preserving information? Unless they expected that information to survive long after them? Unless they already understood that collapse was not a possibility, but an eventuality? And now the story expands beyond Kultepe itself, because Kultepe was not isolated. It was part of a massive Assyrian trade, networked out a system spanning vast regions, connecting cities, connecting merchants, connecting economies, a world without modern communication, yet entirely dependent on structured trust. And trust is fragile, so they engineered physical truth, seals. But seals are not just barriers. They are guarantees, a promise that what is inside is real, unchanged, uncorrupted. But even this raises more questions than answers, because if this was only commerce, why does it feel like something deeper is happening? Why does it feel like preservation was just as important as trade? And then comes the most unsettling thought of all. If this system existed here, how widespread was it really? And how much of it is still buried beneath Anatolia today? Because what we have discovered is only what we have reached, not what exists. And that difference is everything. Because archaeology is not a complete record of history, it is a survival sample, fragment of what happened to remain intact, not necessarily what mattered most. So beneath the soil, there may still be sealed messages like this, still intact, still untouched, still unread, not because they were lost, but because we have not yet accessed them. And that brings everything back full circle, a message from 4,000 years ago, never opened, and yet still read. And that forces one final question. If we can access the past without breaking it, what else have we assumed must be destroyed in order to be known? Because the envelope from Kültepe was never opened, but it was read. And that single fact breaks one of our deepest assumptions, that knowledge requires destruction. And if that assumption is false, then history is not gone, it is only sealed and waiting, somewhere beneath Anatolia, still waiting for a method that can see it, without ever opening it.